Okay, we're on. Well, 6 minutes to start. Got a few people in already. Good. Glad you liked it. Another couple of minutes and we get started. There's still more people popping in.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. So we finished up several episodes going through the cosmology, and I'm going to do now two talks on jhana. Thought I'd break it up into two talks. This evening I'm going to focus on the five nivarana, the five hindrances, and next week I'll focus on the jhana factors. So some words about jhana in general. The word jhana is is a Pali word. The Sanskrit is dhyana, and it may be of interest to know that becomes that's the same word that becomes in Chinese. It becomes Chan, and in Japanese becomes Zen. And in the suttas, it's very important, and it's almost synonymous with meditation. One of the words that is commonly used for meditation, or the verb to meditate, when you see that in translation, it's often the Pali janeti, Jhaneti, janeti, which means to do jhana. So meditation is pretty much synonymous with doing jhana. Now, it seems that approaching this topic has its difficulties. One is, I think, people have all sorts of preconceived ideas, and they often think of jhana as something impossibly difficult. And another real issue is, if any of you have done any reading or listening to different teachers talk about jhana, you can often become confused and frustrated because there seems to be so many different takes on it. You can often find disagreements in descriptions and interpretation, probably around the area of jhana more than anything else. And I'm just talking about just within Theravada Buddhism, never mind going beyond that. So it becomes a bit difficult to find your way through. So I'll state at the outset my own take on it, which general idea, which not everyone would agree with, but I find thinking of it this way cuts through a lot of the contradictions and difficulties. Is instead of thinking of the four jhanas as clearly defined discrete states, it's probably better to think of samadhi as a continuum. And the actual boundaries between when someone is in jhana or when they're in first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, etc., are not so sharply defined as some of the texts may lead you to think. And this, if you approach it in thinking about it in that way, that resolves a lot of the contradictions between different teachers, because you can think, now here's this spectrum of mind states from the ordinary mind through the four jhanas, and one teacher, may define first jhana as, say, this portion of the spectrum, but the other teacher may be defining it as this spectrum. So that the contradictions end up being really just a matter of definition. They're not. The quality of samadhi is what underlies the states of jhana. Is the primary quality developed in Samata meditation. And I should maybe also make this distinction clear between Samata and vipassana. We generally talk about the theory of meditation as being different kinds of meditation, and the two broad categories are Samata and vipassana. Vipassana is meditation that is based on clearly seeing the objects of consciousness. And it's actually a more difficult meditation to really master. And it culminates in the realization of nibbana. So it's really like the higher path or practice. Jhana meditation is based on or samatha, it's called, is based on the practice of taking a arbitrarily chosen object, such as the breath or a kasina. There are many different possibilities of what you can focus on, and attempting to stabilize and unify the mind on that single object. Well, so this is the underlying idea of doing samatha meditation, whereas with vipassana, you're not really choosing an object. You're attempting to observe whatever arises. So it's kind of a moving target. With samatha meditation, when you sit down to do a session of samatha, you will deliberately choose an object, such as the breath. That's probably the most common one we do. But you can also, like metta meditation, meditate on the feeling of loving kindness, or a kasina meditation, which is you're using a visual object as your point of focus. So there's a different skill set involved in vipassana and samatha. And I found that people who, like many Westerners, begin their meditation careers with vipassana. Often their first approach is with vipassana, and they may do that for some years before they take up samatha, which is kind of reverse. It is actually reverse, the opposite of the way recommended by the Buddha, that samatha is a essential preliminary practice. Before you can do vipassana easily, you should have some degree of mastery of samatha. And what happens with people who start with vipassana, they often find it very difficult to pick up samatha because of the different skill that's involved. And it's to someone who's really steeped in the vipassana tradition, it sounds sort of counterintuitive. But what you really need to do samatha well is to master the skill of non-attention. In vipassana, they're done properly, there really are no distractions because everything can be an object. But in samatha, everything other than your chosen object is a distraction from that and should be disregarded. Not forced out of the mind with force of will, but allowed to fade naturally by non-attention. by disregarding any other object, whether it's a thought or a feeling or an external object like a sound, merely allow it to fade away by not attending to it. If you don't pay attention to any object, you're not feeding it any energy, it will tend to dissipate. So you allow only the chosen object into consciousness. And as I said, the primary quality of mind needed is samadhi. And that's a very important word. And we should be clear about the meaning of the word samadhi. If you're reading Buddhist books in English translation, you'll often encounter the word concentration. That's usually given as the translation for samadhi. It's kind of the standard translation. And I've come to really dislike that translation. I don't think it's really correct, and I think it's misleading. One of the issues I see commonly with people is pushing too hard. They kind of strain the mind because of this idea of concentrating. You're supposed to concentrate on the breath. That's quite wrong. Try to get that word of concentration right out of it, and look at what samadhi really means. It's defined in the Visuddhimagga and the Abhidhamma. It's defined as non-wavering. So it's better thought of as stability or stillness. When you concentrate, it means you narrowing down, right? Like if you have a concentrated solution, it means it's been dissipated down to a finer, more high degree. Or you concentrate, you have to concentrate, you're solving math problems, you have to concentrate on it, right? That's entirely the wrong state of mind for doing meditation. The mind should feel peaceful and calm and expansive. It's not a narrow, the mind that has good samadhi and the mind that's going into jhana is not a narrow mind. You're not narrowing the mind to a point. And this is what people try to do, and it's very wrong, and it strains the mind. You can only hold that for a short while. What you're trying to do is keep the mind still. So the mind is wide open, expansive, and think of it, I find it's very useful to describe it this way. Don't think of putting the mind onto the breath or whatever object you're using. Think of opening the mind to the breath. Let the breath come to the mind. Let the breath fill the mind. The mind is vast, expansive, without limit. But it's only filled with the breath. Think of when we talked about the Brahma gods. Their consciousness is the equivalent of the mind in jhana, and it's not a narrow mind at all. A Brahma god can contemplate 10,000 world systems. So his mind is huge, hugely expansive. It's vast. And that's the mind with good samadhi. But its characteristic is it's still. It's not jumping from object to object. It remains stable like the rock of Gibraltar on a single object. So that's the quality of samadhi. Now, another way to think about jhana is don't think of it in terms of going somewhere, attaining something new, accomplishing something. in really what you're doing is allowing the mind to experience a more natural and primordial state of being. And we're going to talk, I'm going to focus today on the 5 hindrances, the nirvana. And these are mental states, defilements of the mind that obstruct samadhi. They're particular lists related to development of samatha meditation. And if the 5 hindrances are not present in the mind will naturally go into deeper samadhi. It's not like an effort to go there. Once the the nirvanas are made quiescent, when they're not active in the mind naturally goes into deeper samadhi because there's nothing hindering it from that. If you want to, again, go to the cosmological comparison, if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke about the Aganya Sutta and the origin of human consciousness on this planet, according to that sutta, comes from the Abhasara Brahma gods of the 2nd jhana level, who then fell to earth and became entangled in coarse matter. So in that kind of mythological or cosmological sense, going into jhana is actually remembering something that's more natural and more ancient, is more natural to our being than this complex mind states of the sense desire realm. We're returning to a more basic level of consciousness. And nothing new is actually being added to the mind. It's not something out there that we're seeking. We're just trying to allow the mind to experience this more natural, pristine state by removing obstacles and allowing the mind to experience that simplicity and purity. In the Abhidhamma, consciousness is defined as existing on 4 levels or planes, bhumi. Our ordinary consciousness as human beings is sense desire level consciousness. And higher than that is rupa bhumi, which is the level of the Brahma gods, and it's the level of jhana. So when you actually enter jhana, you are making a shift of level of consciousness. You're shifting gears, so to speak, into a higher level of consciousness. And this higher level is, to call it higher is using a spatial metaphor that might be in some ways misleading. It's a more natural state. It's a less complex. It's a simpler, pure, more immediate state of being. And our ordinary default level of consciousness here as human beings is sense desire realm. We are relating to the external world and to our own bodies and our mental activities primarily through the 5 physical senses. Our experience, our goals, our desires, our thoughts and feelings all center around the senses, the 5 senses. even the sixth sense, the mental sense, mostly works with imagined or remembered physical sense objects. So we're very obsessed and caught up in the senses. And it's difficult for us to even imagine. Oh, YouTube is telling me my connection is getting dodgy. It looks like it's back. One of the advantages of jhana is that by stepping outside of the sense desire level, we gain a greater understanding of it. It's like looking down at it from a mountaintop, looking down at the village from a mountaintop. We're stepping outside of that. So we're experiencing a more basic level of mind that's not confused by the senses. So the five nivarna are the things that hold us within that first level of consciousness. They keep us tied up in that. The word nivarna, translated hindrance, literally it means something like a wrong path, a byway. And they're best thought of not as obstacles like roadblocks, but as detours. Like the mind wanders off down these byways and it doesn't advance further deeper into samadhi if it's caught in these nivarnas. And there are five of them. Kamachanda, which is sense desire. Vyapada, which is ill will. Tinamida, is sloth and torpor. Uducha kakucha, which is restlessness and worry. And vichikicha, which is uncertainty or skeptical doubt. So we'll go through them. Kamachanda, sense desire, is the interest of the mind in this world of the senses. And in terms of as a nivarna and an obstacle to samadhi, it's to be thought of very broadly. It's not just obvious sense desire, like fantasizing about sex or food or something. It's going out through the senses for diversion, amusement, entertainment. As long as you're going out through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, then you're not deepening your samadhi. So becoming distracted by sense objects. There's a story in, I think it's in the Samyutta Nikaya, is a monk who's practicing meditation in some remote place. And every day, part of his daily routine, he takes a bath in a lotus pond. And one day he's there in the pond and he's smelling one of the lotuses. He bends over to smell the lotus and he hears a voice from the shore crying out, "Thief, thief, you're a thief." And he looks around and says, "Who's that? Who's speaking to me?" And it's a dewa, it's a forest dewa. He says, "I'm no thief. I've never stolen anything." And she says, You're a smell thief. You're a thief of odors." And it goes on to talk about the sense restraint. The sense restraint, indriya samvara, is a very important adjunct to developing meditation. If you're serious about deepening meditation during a period of time, like if you were on a retreat, you should make an effort to practice sense restraint. And even if you're doing a daily practice, like for an hour, don't Don't allow yourself to become distracted by sense objects. You need to rein the senses in. This is the main reason why it's recommended when you're on retreat to take the 8 precepts, because the additional precepts are all aids to sense restraint. They're cutting off avenues you can use to amuse and divert yourself. Because as long as you're going out through the senses, you're not advancing beyond the senses. You're still caught in that first level of consciousness. So kama chanda is very, if you're trying to develop samatha and you're finding yourself wandering off in the senses, either in the imagination or in actual physical senses of paying attention to smells and sights and so on, then you need to be aware of that and rein it in. The second one is vipassana, which is ill will, and this is negative states of mind, and it's to be broadly defined as well in terms of any kind of negative state of mind, from anger, hatred, all the way down to like a minor irritation. So if you find yourself when you're meditating becoming irritated by a buzzing fly or by a pain in your knee, or the room is too cold or too hot, then you're in the grip of vipassana. And this also keeps you locked into the sense desire realm. But on the negative side, your mind is complaining about imperfect conditions. And this is, in some ways, it's just the negative flip side of kamachanda. One is the delight or interest in sense objects, and one is irritation or ill will towards them. Whereas the way forward is non-attention to them. Tinamida is translated sloth and torpor. And the translation, I think, was chosen to try and imitate the dual word in Pali. Pali has this habit of this kind of a literary thing of putting close synonyms together. And in some texts in Pali, you'll see a whole list that it becomes very, very difficult for translators. They have to come up with synonyms in English, but they'll have where they're trying to emphasize a point in Pali, there'll be like 4, 5, 6 close synonyms. And often these words like tinamida is referring to mind state of dullness and torpor. Visuddhimagga actually distinguishes between tinamida as tina being dullness of the chitta, and midda as being dullness of the chittasaka. But really that's experienced as one and the same thing. It's dullness, heaviness, sleepiness, the mind that's not bright and engaged. And this can become a very very pernicious kind of a defilement. You can get really caught in it. And it has some one reason it's so difficult is because it has some family resemblance, let's say, to samadhi. The mind that's gripped in tinamida can be relatively stable. It's not really restless or wandering around, but that's not because it's bright and clear and filled with the object of consciousness. It's just because the level of consciousness has sunk and the mind becomes very unengaged and dull. So it's actually recommended when you are caught in the grip of tinamida, then don't make effort at that time to deepen your samadhi. Don't try hard to keep the mind still. That's not the critical thing at that time. First, you have to wake up. So whatever it takes to brighten the mind and shed the cobwebs is useful, even if it means kind of letting the reins off a little bit and opening up to a bit of distraction. First, you have to wake up. So, first thing to notice when you find yourself getting dull in meditation is to pay attention to the posture. If you're bright and wide awake, clear, the posture is not that important. But if you're falling into dullness, you have to really first make an effort to sit up straight, keep the back straight, don't slouch. And you can do things like meditating with eyes open is very good to try and again, this allows in more distraction. So it's not deepening your samadhi, but you need to wake up. So letting light in. Light is very important for overcoming this. Get up and do walking meditation. There are many things. There's a sutta where the Buddha is talking to Moggallana in his early days when he was struggling with this defilement. The Buddha gave him a whole list of things to try, such as splashing your face with cold water, going out of doors and looking at the stars. Now, these are all things, they're not conducive to samadhi as such. They're distractions, but they'll wake you up, and then you can get to work. One kind of curious one that's actually mentioned in the sutta is pull your earlobes. That may be a kind of, like a physical acupuncture trick sort of thing. There's one in the Tibetan text that talks about a similar thing is hold the tongue, curl the tongue back in the mouth and press it against the hard palate as far back as you can comfortably reach. That's a similar sort of thing. It activates some kind of a circuit in there. I recall one early retreat I did when I was still a layman, and I was having some trouble with this. And my teacher at the time suggested I go outside and walk barefoot in the snow. Now that worked. That works well for waking you up. So Tinamida. The next one is another compound word, uducha kakucha. And some of the translators have tried to copy that kind of rhyming sound of it by translating this as worry and flurry. Uducha is the defilement of restlessness, and kukucha is related. It's like the obsessive activity of the mind that occurs that we experience often as worry or anxiety, agitation in that way. So this is the opposite of tinamida. This is when the mind is spinning out. It's not, you're not able to sit still or keep the mind still. There's thoughts going hundreds every minute, and this, that, and the other, with monkey mind. And this is the opposite. This is the opposite of sloth and torpor, and it should be dealt with in the opposite way. With restlessness, it's very important to subdue restlessness by stillness. And this can be difficult because your whole body and mind feels at that time like it wants to move, and uh, you need to make this supreme effort to sit still and keep the mind still. You never, this is an important thing to remember, is you never conquer restlessness by giving into it, by appeasing it. And this is something very common with meditators, is that they experiencing restlessness, so they tell themselves, my meditation is not going well now. If I get up and go for a walk, or do some housework, or read a book for a while, then I'll come back later and my meditation will be better. That doesn't work. You're just feeding the restlessness, and it'll come back again and again. You don't give into it. Your mind will come up with 101 things that are more important to be doing right now. Just ignore that. Just remain still. And then you get through to the other side of restlessness and you'll experience peacefulness. But you have to subdue that restlessness. So it's you sit in a very still posture. Don't move. Keep your eyes shut. And really work on stabilizing the mind and deepening the samadhi. Whenever the mind wanders off, just bring it back to the object. Don't get upset with you. This is another important thing, is don't get upset with yourself because, I've wandered off. I've been thinking about this or that for the last few minutes. Don't get upset with yourself. Just bring yourself back again and again, as many times as necessary, to the object of concentration or samadhi, and try and develop that inner stillness. The last defilement in the list is vicikiccha, which is defined or translated as either uncertainty or as skeptical doubt. And this is the lack of or opposite of saddha, confidence or faith. So vicikiccha is the mind that is uncertain, particularly about the practice. And it's different. It's important to understand that this is different from having an open mind. That you don't need to have the answer, but you need to be open to it. If you are in the grip of vicikiccha, it's like there's a desire in the mind to be sure, to have an answer, but it can't find it. So it jumps back and forth between different possibilities. This uncertainty about the practice is the way it usually plays out in meditation. Like, am I doing this right? Is this the correct way to do this meditation? Am I doing something wrong here? Whereas if you just have faith in the process and the practice, and you just surrender yourself to it and just do it, any little difficulties will sort themselves out in time. You don't need to be a master of all the theory before you can sit down. There are many stories in some in Theravada texts, and some in stories from Ajahns, and stories from outside even of Buddhism, of a very common motif is that you have some great master who is surrounded by these learned students, and they're talking about some esoteric, abstruse doctrines. And there's some simple peasant or fisherman or somebody, uneducated, ignorant peasant who approaches the master full of faith and asks for the teachings. And the master's kind of dismissive of him. I just wanted to kind of get this bumpkin out of here so I can get back to discussing abstract theory. And he tells him, "Oh, go sit down and watch your breath." And this fellow was really grateful. He said, "Oh, thank you, master." And he goes off and practices that, just whatever the master told him, just a few words of instruction, and he attains to all sorts of deep states of accomplishment in no time, whereas the learned students struggle for years without getting anywhere. There's a lot of variations of this story. As the famous one is the Zen sixth patriarch, who was the ignorant, unlearned southerner who came to the monastery. And there's one in the biography of Ajahn Mun about the village people who were one of the minor ethnic groups in northern Thailand who lived in a kind of primitive way. And they wondered they saw the monks were wandering through, and they saw the monks sitting, and they asked them, what are you doing? And Ajahn Mun says, "We're looking for Buddho." "What's Buddho?" "It's something we lost a long time ago, and we're trying to find it." "Can we look for Buddho too?" Yes. All you have to do is just sit down and just say Buddho, Buddho, Buddho as you breathe. And in no time, several of the monks or several of these villagers were having like second, third jhana experiences. And it was really quite amazing. And the reason for this rapid progress is faith. They have faith in the practice, so they just do it. They surrender themselves to it. So no witchy kitcha, no skeptical doubt. Just do it. And I think really from my experience and observation of people that, how some people make good progress in meditation relatively quickly and some struggle for years and years. And I think that the degree of faith in the practice is really a very important defining factor, maybe the most important factor of how well they progress. So there are these 5 nivarnas that hold you back. They keep you running around in this lowest level of consciousness, in the sense desire level, and bind you up in it. They confuse you. Right? You're wandering down these various side paths of distraction. And if the nivarnas are made quiescent, if you're able to subdue them and allow them to settle out, and they're not present, they're not bothering you, then there's really little to be done. The mind just naturally drifts into deeper states of samadhi and into jhana. It's like the obstacles are removed. That's the natural course of the mind. There's a set of similes for the 5 nivarna that kind of illustrate this point, that the clear mind is compared to a bowl of water, a bowl of clear water. And this is a simile, this is an image that the Buddha uses often, comparing the clear mind to water. And still, clear, pristine water, you can see the bottom of the bowl. If there's pebbles or something at the bottom of the bowl, you can see through it. It's clear. There's no obstruction. But what can prevent you from seeing through the water, the various things? You can throw colored dye into the water. Now it's pretty, but it's not clear. And that's compared to sense desire. Or the water can be boiling. So you've got heat up water and it foams and boils. That's like ill will. Or the water can get covered by scum, like pond scum, like growth on top of the water. That's like tinamida, which feels like that. It feels like a heavy weight on you. Or the wind can be whipped up by the wind, and that's like uducha kakucha, restlessness. Or the water can be cloudy, like dirty. That's like a wichikicha, uncertainty. So that's, I think I'll stop there for this evening and take questions. And I'm going to continue this theme next week and talk about the jhana factors and the four jhanas. So this was an introduction to Samata practice and a focus on the five nivarana. Okay. So if there's any questions, put them in the chat and we'll try and deal with them. There's one here already. Is it related to papancha? Yeah, papancha is proliferation. It's often called in English. It's the tendency of the mind to spin out and wander and come up with wild ideas and schemes, one thing building on another. And that's is very closely related to uducha, I would say, like restlessness. The restless mind runs off with all sorts of things. What was the English word that correlates with pond scum? Well, pond scum is an English word. I don't understand your question. Do you mean which nivarna is it related to? It's related to sloth and torpor, tinamida. How were the outflows to the senses experienced, i.e., sensation of energy? Well, they're experienced as a wandering of the mind. There's kind of an impulse or a desire to go out through the senses. You find yourself, if you're doing walking meditation, you find yourself kind of looking around, looking at the trees or listening to the birds. That's kamachanda. That's the mind distracting itself with sense objects. And that's very natural for us at our level of consciousness. That's what we do. And we're trying to get to a higher level of consciousness, and we've got to restrain that. Not allow that impulse out. As long as you're going out even in these little ways, then you're keeping yourself locked in that lowest level of kamachanda. Unrelated question. Kama equals intentional act, but it's a commonly used to result of the action. Doesn't mean both. No, the use of kama to mean result of action is incorrect. It's common. That's become sort of the common usage in English. It's colloquial usage. You say that's his karma, but that's not correct. The word in Pali for result of kama is vipaka. Kama is your action, what you do. If you're going to use them technically correct, that's kama does not mean the result of that. There's a separate word for that, which is vipaka. At what point in one's practice should one become concerned with jhana? Can be too worried about jhana be overly distracting? No, it's not. It's there's not a problem. There's never a problem with developing samadhi. It's not something you get that'll do you any harm. It's always useful, and traditionally it's developed first. So like the first thing you do is samatha practice, and it's something you can carry on right through. Here's a question: how does one differentiate between access and first jhana? Personally, I don't like to talk in terms of access concentration or neighborhood concentration. That's something that came in with the Visuddhimagga. It's kind of a late development, which my take on it and is the Visuddhimagga tends to be a bit too rigid in its categories and definitions. And as I said at the outset, it's best to see development of samadhi as a kind of a spectrum. So they invented this category of access concentration for the mind that's got deep samadhi but's not quite in jhana. So it becomes just a matter of definition. What do you call access concentration, or what do you call jhana? And I don't find it useful to obsess over these definitions. They're useful as general guidelines or signposts, but they're not the practice. The actual experience is not that crisply or clearly delineated as the as some of these texts will lead you to believe. Is jhana absolutely necessary for attainment of enlightenment? Well, the short answer to that is yes. The Abhidhamma description of the states of mind leading to path and fruit or enlightenment does require the mind to experience jhana. But there is also mention in the suttas of when the Buddha is talking about different paths of practice. One of the ones he mentions, without ever describing it in detail, but just as a mention in a list, is bare insight. And that's taken to mean insight without prior development of jhana. And you'll find if you study the Burmese masters, like I'm somewhat familiar with the writings of Ledi Sayadaw and Mahasi Sayadaw, they base a lot of their work on a strict following of the Abhidhamma theory. But the Mahasi Sayadaw particularly, he also practiced and taught pretty much a straight vipassana practice without prior development of jhana. And they call that bare insight. And he says in his writings that the mind that's really advanced in vipassana is experiences momentary jhana on objects. And there's a momentary entry into jhana before enlightenment. So there's still that meets that Abhidhamma criterion. But if you go to the suttas, and when the Buddha talks about paths of practice, What he mostly talks about is some variations, but the one that he mostly goes back to is development of the four jhanas prior to um, the investigation and the experience of insight and enlightenment. And it seems like this, the development of jhana primes the mind, makes it workable, and makes the vipassana practice much more fruitful if you're coming out of a jhana. But there's another twist to it: is you can't do vipassana in jhana. You can't do any investigation while you're in jhana because the mind is too still. But the optimum time for doing investigation is after emergence from jhana. I have read that celibacy is a requirement for jhana attainment, but I can't remember specifically where. I don't think that it's like a lifestyle of celibacy is necessary for jhana, but certainly abstaining from sexual activity for a period of time would be necessary, because of obviously sexual activity is hugely sense desire based. I mean, it completely locks you into that level of consciousness. Is vision one of the five hindrances? No, vision is not a hindrance, but the desire or interest in vision or other senses is. That's kamachanda. So so for example, if go back to the example of you're doing walking meditation. So you're walking on a walking path. The recommended way is to have your vision downcast, so legs, say, a 45-degree angle. So you're looking at the ground ahead of you. So it becomes functional. You're just looking to make sure you're not stumbling on a root or something. So that's not a hindrance. That's not a problem. But it becomes a hindrance if you start looking around at the trees and taking an interest in pretty rocks or flowers or butterflies or something. Then you're falling into kamachanda. I mean vision during meditation with eyes closed. Oh, okay. Okay, this is a whole nother big